The red dust of Zerion Prime swirled around Captain Zethkar's boots as he surveyed the crash site. The alien vessel had torn a jagged scar across the crystalline desert, leaving behind twisted metal and scattered debris that glowed faintly in the pale light of the system's twin suns. His crew of Catherian salvagers spread out across the wreckage, their scanner devices chirping as they searched for anything of value. "Captain!" called out his second-in-command, Engineer Vexna, her scaled blue hands dancing over her portable analyzer. "The energy readings from this crash are unlike anything in our databases. The hull composition contains elements that shouldn't exist in stable form." Zethkar nodded, his 4 eyes narrowing as he examined a piece of the strange metal. The Catherians had been salvaging wrecks across the galaxy for over 3 centuries, yet this vessel defied every principle of known physics. Its sleek design suggested advanced technology, but there were no markings or symbols that matched any known civilization in their extensive records. The desert wind carried an odd scent, something organic and warm that seemed completely out of place on this barren world. Zerion Prime had been dead for millennia, its atmosphere too thin to support most forms of life, its surface scoured clean by endless storms of abrasive minerals. The Catherians only came here because the planet's unique gravitational field created a natural graveyard for ships that suffered hyperspace drive failures. "Movement detected in Section 7, announced Scout Thrixol through the communication implant. The young Catherian's voice carried a note of excitement mixed with concern. "Whatever it is, it's alive and generating significant heat signatures." Zethkar felt his primary heart skip a beat. Life signs on Zerion Prime were impossible. The radiation levels alone should have sterilized anything organic within hours of exposure. He signaled for his team to converge on Thrixol's position, their salvage tools quickly replaced by emergency medical equipment. They found the scout crouched beside a section of the ship's hull that had been torn open like flower petals. Inside, protected by what appeared to be an emergency shelter made from the ship's own materials, lay the most unusual being any of them had ever encountered. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but stood taller than a Catherian, with pale skin that seemed to glow with an inner warmth. Fine hair covered its head in shades of brown and gold, and its features were arranged in patterns that suggested intelligence and emotion. The creature was unconscious, but breathing steadily. Its clothing was simple but well made, and beside it lay tools and supplies that spoke of careful preparation and remarkable ingenuity. Most startling of all, the area around the creature showed signs of impossible vitality. Where its emergency shelter touched the ground, tiny green shoots had begun to emerge from the sterile sand. "By the sacred depths," whispered Medic Colron as she ran her scanners over the mysterious being. "Its cellular structure is entirely organic, carbon-based, with no apparent cybernetic enhancements. Yet it's surviving in conditions that would kill most known life forms in minutes." Zethkar studied the readings with growing amazement. The creature's body temperature was generating a localized microclimate, somehow creating the exact conditions needed for plant growth in soil that had been dead for thousands of years. Even more incredible, the air around the being contained traces of water vapor in concentrations that defied the planet's atmospheric conditions. "Captain?" Vexna's voice cut through his thoughts. "We're detecting massive atmospheric disturbances approaching from the north. The storm system is unlike anything on record for this region." Looking toward the horizon, Zethkar could see towering clouds building with impossible speed. Their dark mass pregnant with moisture that shouldn't exist in Zerion Prime's thin atmosphere. Lightning flickered within the storm front, but it carried an unusual blue-white hue that spoke of charged particles unknown to Catherian science. The unconscious being stirred slightly, its lips moving as if speaking in some unknown language. As it did, the green shoots around its shelter grew visibly taller, and the scent of growing things became stronger on the desert wind. We need to get it back to our ship immediately, Zethkar decided. Whatever this creature is, it's connected to these atmospheric changes in ways we don't understand. Thrixol, prepare the medical bay for an unknown life form. Vexna, I want continuous monitoring of all environmental systems during transport. As they carefully lifted the mysterious traveler onto a portable stretcher, the first fat raindrops began to fall from the impossible storm clouds above. Each drop that struck the desert sand created tiny explosions of life, awakening seeds and spores that had laid dormant for millennia in the planet's crystalline soil. The journey back to their ship, the merchant vessel, Prosperity's Edge, took nearly an hour through the increasingly difficult terrain. The rain fell steadily now, transforming the hard-packed sand into rich, dark earth that squelched beneath their feet. Plants that existed in no botanical database began sprouting along their path, growing with supernatural speed toward the alien suns. Once aboard their ship, they placed the unconscious being in the medical bay's isolation unit. Through the transparent walls, they could observe its steady breathing and the remarkable way its presence seemed to affect even the ship's internal atmosphere. The air recyclers were working overtime to process gases they'd never encountered, while the hull temperature rose several degrees just from proximity to their unexpected passenger. "Captain," Colran reported after completing her initial medical scans, "this being appears to be in some form of induced hibernation, possibly a survival mechanism triggered by the crash. Its neural activity suggests active dreaming, and there are trace amounts of unknown compounds in its bloodstream that might be responsible for the biological effects we're observing." Zethkar studied the readings with fascination. In his 40 years of deep space salvage operations, he'd encountered hundreds of alien species, from the silicon-based crystalline communes to the energy beings of the Nexus Collective. Yet nothing had prepared him for this creature that seemed to carry life itself within its very cells. Outside the ship, the storm continued to build in intensity. The rain now fell in sheets across the desert landscape, creating the first rivers Xerion Prime had seen in geological ages. Through the ship's observation deck, they could watch as the planet's surface transformed from barren wasteland into something approaching a garden world. "All crew to stations," Zethkar announced over the ship's communication system. "We're witnessing something unprecedented here, and I want detailed records of every aspect of this phenomenon. Whatever this being is, wherever it came from, it's rewriting the fundamental laws of planetary ecology before our eyes." The Catherian crew worked through the night, taking measurements and collecting samples while their mysterious passenger slept peacefully in the medical bay. Each hour brought new wonders as Xerion Prime continued its impossible transformation. Lakes formed in valleys that had been dry since before the rise of Catherian civilization. Forests of unknown trees began to emerge from soil that had never known the touch of root or leaf. But perhaps most remarkable of all was the effect the being's presence had on the Catherians themselves. Crew members reported feeling more energetic, more creative, more connected to each other than they had in years. Old injuries began to heal with unusual speed, and several crew members who had suffered from chronic health conditions found their symptoms mysteriously improving. As the first dawn of Xerion Prime's new age broke across the transformed landscape, the mysterious being finally began to stir. Its eyes opened slowly, revealing irises of deep brown flecked with gold, and it looked around the medical bay with obvious confusion, but no apparent fear. Zethkar approached the isolation unit carefully, his translator device ready despite having no idea what language the creature might speak. When it saw him, the being's face transformed with what could only be described as a smile, and it raised one hand in what appeared to be a universal gesture of greeting. "Hello," it said in perfectly clear Catherian standard. though its voice carried musical harmonics that no Cytherian throat could produce. "I apologize for any inconvenience my arrival may have caused. I am David Chen, formerly of Earth, currently a traveler between worlds. I believe I owe you my life." The words sent shockwaves through Zethkar's understanding of the universe. The being could speak their language perfectly, despite having never encountered their species before. Moreover, the name it had given suggested origins from a world called Earth, which existed in no star charts or databases known to the Cytherian Consortium. "You are aboard the merchant vessel Prosperity's Edge," Zethkar replied carefully. "I am Captain Zethkar of the Cytherian Salvage Guild. We found you in the wreckage of your ship on the surface of Zerion Prime. How are you feeling?" David Chen sat up slowly, testing his movements with the careful attention of someone assessing potential injuries. "Physically, I feel well enough, though I suspect I've been unconscious for some time. My ship's emergency systems were designed to keep me alive until rescue could arrive, though I'll admit I wasn't expecting to be found quite so quickly." "Your ship," Vexana interjected, unable to contain her curiosity. "It contains technologies and materials that our best scientists cannot identify. The hull composition alone represents advances in metallurgy that shouldn't be possible according to known physical laws." David's expression grew thoughtful, and he looked through the observation window at the transformed landscape outside. His eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been guilt. "Oh no," he said softly. "It's happening again. I was hoping the hibernation protocols would prevent the environmental cascade, but it appears your planet's unique crystalline substrate has amplified the effect beyond all previous parameters." "Effect?" Zethkar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I carry something inside me," David explained, his voice heavy with both wonder and burden. "Something my species calls the green gene, though it's far more complex than any simple genetic sequence. It's a symbiotic relationship with life itself, developed through centuries of careful cultivation and genetic modification. Wherever I go, life follows, but not always in ways that can be controlled or contained." Through the medical bay's windows, they could see Zerion Prime continuing its transformation. What had been a dead world 12 hours ago now showed signs of a complex ecosystem developing at impossible speed. Clouds of insects filled the air above newly formed wetlands, while herds of animals that had no business existing anywhere in this star system grazed on grasslands that had sprouted overnight. "This is why you were traveling alone," Zethkar realized. "You're not just exploring the galaxy, you're fleeing from something." David nodded slowly, his expression becoming distant. "My people, humans, we were dying. Our homeworld was poisoned by centuries of industrial excess, and despite our best efforts at terraforming and environmental restoration, we couldn't save it in time. So our best scientists developed the Green Gene Project, creating individuals who could carry the essence of Earth's biosphere within themselves, spreading life to new worlds and ensuring that something of our world would survive even if our species did not. The implications of this revelation struck the Cytherian crew like a physical blow. Here was a being from a species that had faced extinction and had chosen to sacrifice everything to preserve life itself. Not just their own lives, but life in general, spreading it throughout the galaxy like seeds on cosmic winds. "How many of you are there?" Colran asked quietly. "I don't know," David admitted. "We were launched in different directions, toward different star systems, with the hope that at least some of us would find suitable worlds for the life we carry. I've been traveling for... It's hard to calculate time when you spend most of it in hibernation, but I believe it's been over 200 standard years since I left Earth." The weight of loneliness in his voice was unmistakable. 2 centuries of solitary travel through the void, carrying the hopes of his entire species, while having no idea if any of his fellow travelers had survived their own journeys. "Your arrival here may have been accidental," Zethkar said slowly, "but I believe it was also fortuitous for both our peoples. Zerion Prime has been a dead world for millennia, useful only as a navigational landmark and salvage site. If you can truly transform it into a living world, you may have given us something more valuable than all the salvage in this sector." David looked around at the Catherians with surprise. "You would welcome such changes? Most species I've encountered in my travels have been afraid of what I represent. Uncontrolled biological change, ecosystem disruption, the potential for their own worlds to be transformed beyond recognition." "Perhaps," Vexna said thoughtfully, "that's because they were thinking too small. We've been salvaging dead technology from dead ships around dead worlds for generations. What you offer is the possibility of salvaging life itself, of turning dead worlds into gardens." As if in response to her words, a flight of birds that resembled nothing in any known ornithological database passed by the observation windows, their songs carrying melodies that seemed to harmonize with the deeper rhythms of the ship's engines. Zethkar made a decision that would change the course of both their species. "David Chen of Earth, I formally invite you to remain aboard the Prosperity's Edge as our guest and partner. If you're willing to work with us, I believe we can find ways to help you control and direct the life-giving gifts you carry while helping you in your search for other survivors of your people." David's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion the Catherians had seen from him since his awakening. "You would do that? Even knowing the risks, the uncertainties of what my presence might bring?" "Life," Zethkar said simply, "is always uncertain. But it's also always preferable to the alternative." Outside, the rain continued to fall on the transformed world of Zerion Prime, and in the distance, they could hear the first songs of birds that had never existed before this day. The lonely human traveler had found allies at last, and the universe itself seemed to be celebrating the union with symphonies of wind and water and growing things. The symbiosis begins. 3 months had passed since David Chen's arrival aboard the Prosperity's Edge, and the changes to both ship and crew had been remarkable beyond all previous understanding of biological science. The Catherian vessel, once a purely mechanical construct designed for efficiency and durability, had begun to evolve into something that existed at the intersection of technology and living organism. It started with the air recycling systems. Within weeks of David's integration into the crew, the mechanical filters had begun developing what could only be described as organic components. Microscopic organisms, spawned from David's unique biology, had colonized the filtration networks and were now processing atmospheric waste with an efficiency that surpassed the original engineering by over 300%. The air throughout the ship had taken on a sweet, clean quality that reminded the crew of spring mornings on their homeworld. Captain Zethkar stood in the newly transformed observation deck, watching Zerion Prime through bioluminescent viewing panels that had replaced the traditional transparent aluminum windows. The living material filtered harmful radiation while enhancing the visual spectrum in ways that revealed details of the planet's surface that had been invisible before. Zerion Prime itself had become unrecognizable. Where once there had been endless crystalline deserts, vast forests now stretched toward every horizon. Rivers carved silver paths through valleys filled with flowering meadows, while mountain slopes wore crowns of snow that fed cascading waterfalls into emerald lakes. The planet's twin suns, once harsh and unforgiving, now seemed to smile down on a world that pulsed with vibrant life. "Captain," called Engineer Vexna from her workstation, her scaled skin now bearing a subtle iridescent quality that had developed since David's arrival. "The planetary surveys are complete, and the results are extraordinary. We're detecting over 10,000 distinct species across the planet's surface, representing complete ecosystem integration in what should have required millions of years of evolutionary development. David emerged from the ship's botanical laboratory, where he had been working with Medic Colron to understand the mechanisms behind the rapid speciation they were witnessing. His human features had taken on a slightly different quality during his time aboard the ship, his skin showing faint patterns that seemed to shift with his emotions, while his eyes now held flecks of green that matched the life forces he carried within him. The green gene doesn't just create life, he explained, settling into a chair that had molded itself to accommodate his physiology. It acts as a template for biological optimization, drawing on genetic memories stored within human DNA that reach back to Earth's entire evolutionary history. Every organism that emerges carries the potential for adaptation and harmony with its environment. The implications had kept the Cytherian scientists working around the clock for weeks. Their understanding of biology and evolution had been completely revolutionized by observing David's effect on the ship and its crew. The Cytherians themselves were changing, developing enhanced immune systems, improved cognitive function, and a level of emotional connectivity that their species had never experienced before. "There's something else," Colron added, her voice carrying excitement mixed with wonder. "The biointegration isn't just limited to our immediate environment. We're receiving reports from other Cytherian vessels throughout the sector. Ships that have visited Xerion Prime since its transformation are carrying microscopic organisms back to their home ports, and those organisms are beginning to establish themselves in artificial environments throughout our territory." Zethkar felt his hearts racing as the full scope of what was happening became clear. "You're saying David's influence is spreading beyond this single planet?" "More than that," David replied, his expression showing both amazement and concern. "The organisms aren't just spreading randomly, they're creating communication networks, biological information highways that allow different ecosystems to share genetic data across vast distances. It's like the galaxy itself is developing a nervous system." Scout Thrixall burst into the observation deck, his breathing rapid with excitement. "Captain, you need to see this immediately. We're receiving communications from 3 different star systems, all reporting similar transformations. Ships from those systems are requesting permission to dock with us, claiming they've detected what they're calling the source of the green wave." The main communication console activated, displaying a 3-dimensional map of the local galactic sector. Dozens of indicator lights pulsed across the display, showing the locations of worlds that had begun experiencing unexplained biological phenomena. The pattern was clear. A wave of life was spreading outward from Xerion Prime at faster-than-light speeds, carried by the quantum entanglement effects that David's biology somehow made possible. "By the sacred depths," whispered Vexna, "we're witnessing the birth of a galactic ecosystem." Before anyone could respond, the ship's proximity alarms activated. Through the bioluminescent viewing panels, they could see a massive vessel approaching Xerion Prime's orbit. The ship's design was unlike anything in their databases, sleek and organic, covered in what appeared to be living coral formations that pulsed with internal light. "Incoming transmission," announced the ship's communication system, though the voice that emerged carried harmonic frequencies that no known species could produce. "This is Harmonizer Silthara of the Verdant Collective. We seek audience with the Life-Bringer who has awakened the song of growing things throughout this sector of the galaxy." David's face went pale. "The Verdant Collective," he whispered. "I encountered them during my 2nd decade of travel. They're an ancient species that has been searching for biological perfection for millions of years. If they've detected what's happening here..." "Are they dangerous?" Zethkar asked, though he was already calculating defensive strategies. "Not dangerous in the traditional sense," David replied carefully. "But they see biological diversity as something to be controlled, optimized, perfected according to their vision of what life should become." They've transformed thousands of worlds into biological laboratories, conducting experiments that span geological ages. The alien vessel moved closer to the Prosperity's edge, and through the viewing panels, they could see smaller craft detaching from its hull like seeds dispersing from a pod. Each smaller ship was a work of art, sculpted from what appeared to be living bone and decorated with flowing patterns that suggested both technology and organism. "Permission to board granted," the harmonic voice announced, apparently interpreting their lack of response as consent. "The harmonizer will manifest in your vessel's primary gathering space in accordance with standard diplomatic protocols." We don't have a choice, Zethkar realized. A ship that size could destroy us without effort, and if they're truly ancient, they probably have technologies we can't even imagine. The crew gathered in the ship's central common area, which had transformed over the months into something resembling a living forest grove. Bioluminescent vines provided gentle lighting, while flowering plants created natural seating areas that adjusted to accommodate whoever settled into them. The air hummed with the quiet activity of beneficial insects and small creatures that had made their homes in the ship's new ecosystem. A shimmering distortion appeared in the center of the room, gradually solidifying into a being that defied easy description. Harmonizer Silthara stood nearly 3 meters tall, with a form that seemed to shift between plant and animal characteristics. Her skin was composed of what appeared to be living wood, while her hair moved like kelp in an ocean current. Her eyes were compound structures that showed depth and intelligence, while reflecting light in patterns that suggested vast experience. "Greetings, young species," she said, her voice creating harmonies that made the ship's plant life visibly respond with increased growth and brighter colors. "I am Silthara, third harmonizer of the Verdant Collective, speaker for the Great Symbiosis, guardian of the Eternal Garden. I have come to understand the source of the biological awakening that spreads throughout this region of space." Her gaze fell upon David, and her expression changed to something that might have been surprise mixed with recognition. "You carry the deep memory," she observed, "the genetic heritage of a world that was, preserved in living flesh and scattered among the stars. This is unexpected." "Unexpected?" David asked, finding his voice despite the overwhelming presence of the ancient being. "For 60 million years, the collective has guided biological development throughout this galaxy," Silthara explained, her form shifting subtly as emotions played across her features. "We have seeded dead worlds, guided evolution, created perfect ecosystems according to the principles of the Great Symbiosis. Yet what you have accomplished here represents something we have never achieved." She gestured toward the viewing panels, where Zerion Prime continued to display its impossible vitality. "This world has achieved perfect biological harmony in mere months, developing complex, interdependent ecosystems that should require millions of years of careful cultivation. Moreover, the life forms you have created carry within them the potential for infinite adaptation and growth." "What David has done is natural," Kolran interjected, her voice carrying a note of protective pride. "It's not guided or controlled, it's simply life expressing itself as it was meant to be." Silthara's compound eyes fixed on the Catherian medic with what might have been amusement. "Natural. Yes, but also impossible according to every biological principle we have observed. Life requires guidance, structure, careful balance between competing forces. Left to develop randomly, ecosystems collapse into chaos and death." "That's where you're wrong," David said quietly, his voice carrying new confidence. "Life doesn't need guidance from outside. It needs freedom to find its own balance, to develop connections and relationships that serve the whole, rather than serving some predetermined plan." The harmonizer was silent for a long moment, her form shifting through several configurations as she processed this challenge to beliefs that had guided her species for geological ages. Finally, she spoke again, and her voice carried notes of uncertainty that hadn't been present before. The collective has spent millions of years seeking to understand the perfect expression of life, she admitted. We have created wonders beyond imagination, guided the development of countless species, turned dead worlds into gardens of unparalleled beauty. Yet what you have achieved here in mere months surpasses all our greatest accomplishments. Perhaps, Vexna suggested carefully, the difference is in the approach. You've been trying to create perfection according to your vision. David simply allows life to create its own perfection. Silthera's form solidified into something more recognizably humanoid, and for the first time, her expression showed what could only be described as wonder. Would you, she addressed David directly, be willing to share this gift with other worlds? Not under the guidance of the collective, but as a partner in something greater than either of our species has imagined? David looked around at his Cytherian friends, seeing in their faces the same mixture of excitement and apprehension that he felt. The opportunity to spread life throughout the galaxy on a scale he had never imagined was tempting, but the risks were enormous. There are conditions, he said finally. I won't be part of any system that seeks to control or direct the life I help to create. The organisms that emerge must be free to develop according to their own nature, to find their own balance and harmony. And, Zethkar added, stepping forward to stand beside David, the Cytherians will serve as partners in this endeavor. We've learned to work with David's abilities, to support and protect the life that emerges while respecting its autonomy. Silthera's form shimmered with what appeared to be delight. A partnership between the collective's ancient wisdom, humanity's gift for biological creation, and the Cytherians' talent for nurturing and protection. Such an alliance could transform the galaxy into something undreamed of by any of our species alone. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Xerion Prime, but now it carried something new, microscopic organisms that would eventually make their way to other worlds, other systems, spreading the gift of unguided life throughout the cosmos. The lonely human traveler had found not only allies but partners in a project that would reshape the very nature of existence in their corner of the galaxy. As the three species began to plan their unprecedented alliance, none of them could know that their agreement would soon be tested by forces that viewed life itself as a threat to be eliminated from the universe. The galaxy held wonders beyond imagination, but it also harbored dangers that would challenge everything they believed about the nature of existence and the value of the biological diversity they sought to protect. The test of unity. The war began without warning, emerging from the void between galaxies like a plague of dark metal and cold purpose. The enemy called themselves the Void Seekers, and their arrival shattered the peaceful expansion of the green wave across the galaxy's outer rim territories. Unlike any threat the three allied species had previously encountered, the Void Seekers didn't seek conquest or resources. They sought the complete elimination of biological life from the universe. Admiral Zethkar, recently promoted to command the Joint Fleet operations, stood in the bio-integrated command center of the flagship Harmony's Dawn. The ship itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Cytherian technology providing the structural foundation, verdant collective bioarchitecture creating living systems that could adapt and evolve, and David's unique biology serving as the catalyst that bound everything together into a functioning whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. Through the neural interface that connected him to the ship's biological sensors, Zethkar could feel the pain of dying worlds throughout the outer spiral. The Void Seekers' weapons didn't simply destroy, they created zones of absolute entropy where even the possibility of life was erased from reality. Planets that had bloomed with David's gift now appeared on the star charts as gray zones of nothingness. "Report from the Kepler Defense Grid," announced Navigator Thrixall, now bearing cybernetic augmentations that allowed his consciousness to interface directly with the ship's bio-neural networks. 17 more systems have gone dark in the past 6 hours. The Void Seekers are advancing along 3 separate fronts, and their rate of destruction is accelerating. David stood at the center of the command chamber, his human form now visibly integrated with the ship's biological systems. Tendrils of living light connected him to monitoring stations throughout the vessel, allowing him to maintain real-time awareness of every world touched by the green wave. Each planet that died sent shockwaves of anguish through his enhanced nervous system, but he bore the pain willingly, using it to coordinate defensive efforts across impossible distances. "The pattern is becoming clear," he reported, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the ship's living structure. "They're not attacking randomly. They're specifically targeting worlds where biological integration has reached critical mass, places where the green wave has created self-sustaining networks of life." Harmonizer Silthera materialized beside them, her ancient form now bearing visible scars from the psychic trauma of losing so many of her carefully tended garden worlds. "My archives contain no records of this enemy," she admitted, her usual confidence replaced by something approaching fear. "In 60 million years, the collective has never encountered beings whose sole purpose appears to be the negation of existence itself." The main display showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with red zones marking Void Seeker advances and green areas indicating worlds protected by the Alliance. The pattern was disturbing. Despite their technological superiority and the unprecedented cooperation between species, the defensive forces were losing ground steadily. "There," David pointed to a cluster of worlds near the galactic core where Void Seeker forces seemed to be converging. "They're not just destroying randomly, they're moving toward something specific." Vexna, now serving as the Alliance's chief science officer, manipulated the display to show historical data overlays. "Cross-referencing with collective archives, yes, there's a pattern. They're advancing toward the oldest worlds in verdant collective space, places where biological experimentation has been ongoing for millions of years." "The Genesis Gardens," Silthera whispered, her form shifting to colors that spoke of ancient sorrow. "If they reach the core worlds where the first experiments in guided evolution began, they'll be able to trace the biological networks back to their origins. They could unravel 60 million years of careful cultivation in a matter of days." The implications struck the command crew like a physical blow. The Genesis Gardens weren't just ancient research sites. They were the foundational nodes of the galactic ecosystem that the collective had spent eons developing. Their destruction would create a cascade failure that would doom billions of worlds to biological collapse. "How long do we have?" Zethkar asked, though he dreaded the answer. "At their current rate of advance, perhaps 3 standard weeks before they reach the outer defensive perimeter of the Genesis system," Thrixall calculated. "Our combined fleets can't possibly mount a successful defense against forces of that magnitude." David closed his eyes, reaching out through the biological networks that connected him to every world touched by the green wave. Across hundreds of star systems, he could feel the pulse of life continuing its eternal struggle against entropy and death. But he could also feel something else, a deeper pattern that connected not just the worlds he had helped transform, but the ancient networks established by the verdant collective over geological ages. "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" he said suddenly, opening his eyes with new determination. "We've been trying to fight them with conventional tactics, treating this as a military conflict, but this isn't really about territory or resources. It's about 2 fundamentally different approaches to existence itself." "Explain," Silthera requested, her form stabilizing into a configuration that suggested intense concentration. The Void Seekers represent entropy, the universal tendency toward dissolution and death, David continued, his thoughts coming together with startling clarity. They see biological life as an aberration, something that defies the natural order by creating complexity and organization where there should be only chaos. And we represent the opposite, Vexna realized. The tendency toward increasing complexity, the drive to create and preserve and grow. Exactly. So what if instead of fighting them directly, we show them something they've never encountered before? What if we demonstrate that life and entropy can coexist, that biological complexity actually serves the greater cosmic order rather than opposing it? Zethkar felt his heart racing as he began to understand what David was proposing. You want to use the green wave itself as a weapon, not to destroy them but to communicate with them. More than communicate, David said, his form beginning to glow with the same bioluminescent patterns that decorated the ship around them. I want to show them what we've learned about the relationship between life and death, growth and decay, creation and entropy. Maybe they're not evil in any traditional sense. Maybe they're just confused about their role in the cosmic order. The plan that emerged over the following days was unlike anything attempted in the history of galactic civilization. Instead of preparing for conventional battle, the Alliance forces began implementing David's vision of radical communication. Every world touched by the green wave began modifying its biological networks to create what David called entropy gardens. Controlled ecosystems where life and death existed in perfect balance, where creation and destruction served the same cosmic purpose. The biological modifications were staggering in their scope and complexity. Forests that deliberately cultivated decay alongside growth, creating soil that was richer and more fertile because of its embrace of death. Ocean systems where predator and prey relationships were so finely balanced that the death of individuals served to strengthen the vitality of the whole. Mountain ranges where geological processes and biological evolution worked in perfect harmony to create landscapes of unprecedented beauty and stability. On Zerion Prime, now serving as the primary coordination center for the project, David worked with scientists from all three Alliance species to create what they hoped would serve as a universal translator between life and entropy. The planet's surface was reorganized into vast mandala patterns visible from space, each one representing a different aspect of the cosmic balance they sought to communicate. The question, Silthara observed as they watched the final preparations, is whether beings devoted to pure entropy can even perceive the message we're trying to send. They'll perceive it, David said with quiet confidence. The same forces that guide biological evolution also govern the expansion and cooling of the universe. At the deepest level, life and entropy are partners in the same cosmic dance. 3 weeks later, the Void Seeker fleet arrived at the Genesis system to find something completely unexpected. Instead of desperate defensive formations or evacuation protocols, they encountered worlds that sang with harmonized biological activity while simultaneously embracing controlled dissolution. Planets where cities grew themselves from living coral while deliberately creating spaces for decay and renewal. Space itself seemed alive with microscopic organisms that somehow enhanced rather than impeded the natural tendency toward entropy. The first contact was unlike anything in recorded history. The Void Seekers' advance forces simply stopped, their dark vessels hanging motionless in space as their sensors tried to process what they were encountering. For the first time since their arrival in the galaxy, the enemy seemed uncertain. Then, slowly, a communication channel opened. The voice that emerged carried no words, only pure mathematical concepts that spoke directly to the fundamental forces of reality itself. We perceive paradox, the communication translated, life that serves entropy, growth that enhances dissolution, creation that strengthens the cosmic tendency toward ultimate simplicity. David stepped forward in the Alliance Command Center, his consciousness expanding through the biological networks to touch every modified world in the Genesis system. "We offer partnership," he responded, his thoughts somehow translating directly into the mathematical language the Void Seekers understood. "Life and entropy, working together to achieve the ultimate cosmic purpose." "Impossible," came the reply. "Biological complexity opposes universal order. Our purpose is purification, the removal of aberrant organization from the cosmos." "Your purpose is incomplete," David countered. And through the biological networks, he shared the vision that had been growing within him since the Alliance began. Entropy without life is meaningless dissolution. Life without entropy is stagnant perfection. Together, they create something greater than either could achieve alone, a universe that grows toward ultimate beauty through perfect balance. The communication channel fell silent for what felt like eons. Throughout the Genesis system, Alliance forces waited as Void Seeker vessels hung motionless in space, their crews apparently debating concepts that challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which their entire civilization was based. Finally, a new voice joined the communication, one that carried harmonics of age and authority that made even Silthara seem young by comparison. "I am the primary Void, first among the Seekers, guardian of ultimate purpose. For eons beyond counting, we have sought to purify the cosmos of the chaos that biological life represents. Yet what you have shown us suggests that this chaos serves a purpose we had not perceived. Will you work with us?" David asked, barely daring to hope. "Will you help us find the balance between creation and dissolution that serves the universe's ultimate purpose?" "We will consider," the primary Void replied. "Show us more of these entropy gardens. Demonstrate the truth of your claims about the partnership between life and ultimate simplicity." Over the months that followed, the galaxy witnessed the most remarkable transformation in its history. The Void Seekers, instead of destroying worlds, began working with Alliance scientists to create new forms of cosmic balance. Their technology for controlled entropy was combined with biological expertise to create star systems where the birth and death of worlds followed patterns of unprecedented beauty and purpose. David found himself serving as the bridge between radically different approaches to existence, his unique biology somehow allowing him to translate concepts between species that had evolved to see the universe in fundamentally incompatible ways. The lonely human traveler had become the catalyst for a galactic civilization based on cooperation between the forces of creation and dissolution. The rain that had first fallen on Xerion Prime now fell throughout the galaxy, carrying with it microscopic ambassadors of understanding that helped every world find its own unique balance between life and entropy. And in that rain, in that balance, in that unprecedented cooperation between seemingly irreconcilable forces, the universe itself seemed to find a new purpose, not just to expand and cool toward ultimate simplicity, but to create beauty and meaning in the process. The skies had indeed rewarded them with life-giving rain, but the true reward was the understanding that life and death, creation and entropy, growth and dissolution were all parts of a single cosmic symphony that was just beginning to discover its own most beautiful movements.